To start, I need to give a little background information first. I work for a marketing agency, so I'm often asked to travel to different states to help run and overlook meetings with clients. I started working for the company right when I got out of college, and I was hired along with several other new employees. I quickly became friends with another girl who worked there named Megan. We worked in the same branch, so we pretty much became best friends within the first couple weeks. Anyway, a few months passed, until our boss assigned me to go on a business trip with Megan to Houston, Texas. We had each done a few trips prior, but we never had the opportunity to go together. So, as you can imagine, we were both pretty excited to hear the news. We flew in on a Friday night for our meeting the next day. We took an Uber to the hotel once we got off the plane, sometime around 8:30. Shortly after getting dropped off and settling in, Megan suggested going out and exploring some of the bars in the area, since our meeting wasn't until 1 in the afternoon the next day. It was definitely a decision on impulse, but we took an Uber to a little area that had a few bars along the street. The night started off great, and we were making great conversation with a few new faces, even playing some pool together. As the night went on, I started to reach my limit, so I really held back on the drinking. Just around that time, a couple other girls asked if we wanted to go to a different bar, so we agreed and followed them out. Most of the bars were pretty packed, but we found one maybe a half mile down the street that wasn't too crowded. As soon as we walked inside, I realized why. The inside looked to be at least 30 or 40 years older than the other bars around, and the entire place looked run down and dingy. A few of us sat down at a table, but Megan stayed by the bar with another girl, continuing to drink. She's even smaller than me, and I know for a fact that she doesn't drink often. She was starting to act a little out of control, so I got up and told her that we should head back. I don't think she was really able to comprehend anything I said, because she sorta just laughed and went back to drinking. Knowing that she was clearly way too drunk, I ordered an Uber to pick us up and take us back to the hotel. Well, not even a minute after I set it up, she stood up, almost falling over, saying that she didn't feel good. I grabbed her by the arm and attempted to lead her to the bathroom, but the door was locked. I helped her stand up against the wall until they got out, but she started gagging. The back door was only a few feet away, and it was my only other option, so I pulled her out to the parking lot behind the bar in case she got even more sick. There were a couple dumpsters near the back of the parking lot, so I took her over there and sat her down against the fence. She sat there on the ground, hunched over for a few minutes, until I noticed a man walking around the side of the building. He was smoking a cigarette, so it didn't really strike me as anything strange. I tried talking to Megan to see how she was doing, but she couldn't even form proper sentences. I was upset at her for getting this drunk, so my only thought was getting her back to the hotel to lay down as soon as possible. I checked on the Uber and saw that our driver was 5 minutes away. I relayed the information over to Megan, but she didn't respond at all. Just then, I heard footsteps that sounded to be getting closer. I turned my head over my shoulder and saw that the guy was walking directly towards us. When we made eye contact, he jokingly said, "Your friend all right?" I sort of laughed and said, "Not really, but she'll be fine." Instead of saying anything back like I expected, he continued to walk closer to us. When he was within a couple feet away from us, he bent over towards Megan, putting his hands on his knees, and said, "You all right, honey?" Megan was obviously unresponsive to that, but instead of saying anything to me or walking away, he just stood there staring at her. That's when I started getting uncomfortable. Between being in an unfamiliar city and now this random guy staring at Megan in the back of the parking lot, I was starting to get pretty worried. I tried to think of something to say, so I told the guy that our Uber was just a minute away and thanked him for checking on us. He turned his head towards me for the first time since he walked over and said, "No, you shouldn't get in a car when she's like this. The Uber driver will kick you out." I nervously laughed and said we'll take our chances, but this guy only became more and more creepy. He took another step towards Megan and started running his fingers through her hair. I told him to stop, but his somewhat calm demeanor became very aggressive. He told me he was just trying to help her out, but it was clear to me that he had other intentions. When I tried to pull Megan away, he pushed me up against the fence and told me not to test him. That's when I really started freaking out. Once he turned away from me, he set his sights on Megan and told her to get up. She was completely out of it, having no idea what was going on. I screamed at her to get away from him, but she sort of just rolled over to the side on the ground. That was when I made a run for the bar. I didn't bother looking back, and I just assumed he was chasing me, but when I opened the door, I looked back to see that he had his arms around Megan. I started screaming in the bar and yelling for help, and I quickly gathered everyone's attention. A couple guys who were talking to the bartender turned to me and asked what was wrong. I showed them out to the back where the guy now had Megan over his shoulder, attempting to carry her. The two guys yelled at him and charged at him. When the guy saw they were coming after him, he dropped Megan on the cement and hopped the fence to get away. One of the guys hopped the fence and followed after him, but shortly returned out of breath. He got away. One of the bystanders called the police, and within minutes, 2 cop cars had arrived in the parking lot. I explained everything to them, trying not to stumble over my words. An ambulance arrived minutes later for Megan, and I ended up riding in the back with her to the hospital. Other than a few scrapes and bruises, she was ultimately okay. I laid down on the bench just outside her room, barely sleeping a wink. When she woke up the next morning, she wasn't able to recall anything that happened. 2 police officers visited us in her room to ask Megan a few questions, but she was no help. The videos captured on the bar security camera were no help either. The imaging was apparently too dark and blurry, so they had no way of identifying the man. It was confirmed that the guy had never entered the bar, so it's assumed that he spotted us as he was walking by. I ended up attending the meeting the next day without Megan, and my boss was not happy when he found out. We thankfully made it back home safe and sound, but it easily could have turned out so much worse. Megan has thanked me multiple times and has definitely learned her lesson, but it still haunts me, knowing that I was just seconds away from potentially losing my best friend for good. Every year, my family and I go to Florida in the summer for vacation. My wife and I like to travel to different parts of the state each time, so this year, we had our sights set on Key West. We booked a condo that sat inside its own little gated community that was just a short walk away from the ocean. This year, we decided to buy a rental car and drive, just to do a little sightseeing on the way. My wife and I enjoyed the long road trip, but our 5-year-old son, Elliot, was not a fan at all. After countless "are we there yets" and constant complaining, we finally made the 14-hour car drive and arrived at our condo. As we pulled into the complex, we had to pass through a security post, making sure that everyone that was entering was a resident. I was certainly happy to see that, giving my wife and I a sense of ease, knowing that we picked a safe spot for the week. Once we picked up the keys at the office, we drove down the beautiful resort roads to our condo, passing tons of happy families. Our condo complex is beautiful. It was a smaller building, only 2 stories, but the exterior of the building looked brand new. It almost resembled the shape of a huge wooden cabin, with freshly painted wood and palm trees surrounding the property. Our room was on the 2nd floor, with a balcony that overlooked a huge pond in the backyard. It was everything we ever could have asked for and more. We went to bed pretty early that night, in preparation for the big week ahead. We had planned to drive around the city in the morning to check it out, get something to eat, then spend the rest of the day at the ocean. After finding a few promising restaurants and tourist attractions to explore later in the week, we headed back to our condo to go to the beach. After soaking up some sun, it was almost time for dinner, so we went to the shoreside hotel to get some food at the restaurant. Everything seemed completely normal up until this point, but that soon changed shortly after we entered the hotel. We entered through the oceanside door, which was right by the restaurant. The inside had an open room layout, where everything was kind of merged together in one big room. We picked a table overlooking the ocean, so I really didn't pay much attention to the inside, as my eyes were drawn to the ocean scenery. Within minutes after sitting down, my wife, who was sitting across from me, started muttering my name under her breath. I looked at her, confused, until she shifted her eyes across the room to a bench where a bald man was sitting, staring directly at us. I found it strange, but sort of laughed it off, telling my wife I didn't know what his deal was. I sort of forgot about it, until I eventually got up to use the restroom. As I was walking to the bathroom, I was able to get a better view of the man. He was wearing a red t-shirt tucked into a pair of beige khakis. He gave no notice to me as I walked past, almost like he was frozen. It seemed really odd, so I turned back to look again, realizing that he was staring directly at my wife and Elliot. Instead of going into the bathroom, I decided to walk back to the table, where I told my wife we were leaving. I asked Elliot if he'd like to get pizza delivered, and he excitedly responded with a yes as he skipped around the sidewalk heading back to our condo. My wife and I were relieved to get out of there, as we both had a strange feeling about that man. Anyway, the pizza eventually came, and we ate inside as we all watched a movie together. Given that I did the majority of the driving on the way there, the lack of sleep I had the other night was catching up to me. I went to bed pretty early, while my wife and Elliot hung out in the living room. Not too long after passing out, I heard the door to the condo shut. It freaked me out a bit, so I got up to check. As I looked around, neither my wife or Elliot were there. Starting to panic, I ran into my room and checked my phone, and was relieved to see a text from my wife explaining why they left. Her and Elliot were going to the pool for a little bit for a night swim. Our complex had its own private pool, away from the main pool next to the hotel by the ocean, so I deemed it to be a generally safe area. Within a half hour of reading my wife's text, I received a disturbing call from her. "Hey, someone's been standing at the front gate watching us." I shot up in bed after hearing that. Her voice sounded calm, but shaky, and I knew she was freaked out. I told her I was on my way, so I slipped on my shoes and made my way there. To get to the pool, you have to cross a bridge that goes over a pond, then the pool is on the right side. As soon as I made it to the bridge, I could instantly see that there indeed was the shadow of a person leaned up against the fence looking at the pool. As I got closer, I felt myself break a sweat, as I realized that it was the same bald man from earlier. As soon as he heard my footsteps approaching, he instantly turned and began walking away. Finding it hard to be a coincidence, I decided to follow him to see what he was up to. I was maybe 25 feet behind him, but I think he knew, because as soon as he saw me following him, he picked up the pace. I followed him back to another complex, before he turned the corner and was out of sight. I tried running to see where he went, but as soon as I turned the corner, he was gone. Although it was definitely creepy, I was just glad that he was gone. Once I made it back to the pool, we all walked back to our room together. I could tell that my wife was visibly shaken up, but it eventually slipped our minds and we went to sleep. The next day, we spent a lot of time at the beach again, before going to a fancy seafood restaurant for dinner. We had a great day, but the sun had us drained, and we were all exhausted. As soon as we pulled up to the parking lot to go inside, we immediately knew that something was wrong. There were tons of police cars outside the complex across from us, with a group of bystanders watching from the parking lot of our condo. I got out of the car to ask the bystanders if they knew what happened, and one guy responded. He said that it looks like someone tried to kidnap a child, but the father attacked him and was able to stop him. I asked if he saw what the guy looked like, and he said, "It's hard to see this far away, but he was bald." It didn't take long for me to put two and two together. I ran back to the room, shocked, and told my wife what the guy just told me. We were both in disbelief, and she broke down crying, thinking back to the night before when they were alone at the pool. Had my phone ringer not been on and I didn't show up, it wouldn't have been good, knowing that Elliot and my wife could have been his victims. I had just moved to Southern California for college. My roommate and I, both males in our early 20s, thought it would be fun to drive into Mexico because it was only a couple hours away and we'd never been there before. We decided to go on a Saturday morning and take a trip out there. Once we made it to Tijuana around 1 p.m., we parked and immediately hit a bar. We ate tacos and drank a lot of beer and tequila, so we weren't exactly sober at this point. After a couple hours, we exited onto the street, pretty drunk and in very good spirits. It was a pretty warm and sunny day, and there wasn't a single cloud in the sky. Our plan was to hang out a while longer, before making the drive back home at dusk once we sobered up enough. As we were walking around outside, we were approached on the street by a very friendly Hispanic male. He was very short and stocky, maybe 5'2" and approximately in his 30s. He was literally dressed like Lewis from Revenge of the Nerds, wearing a white dress shirt buttoned up all the way and tucked in, with hiked up trousers and a pair of sunglasses. He was very friendly and presented himself as a tour guide, offering to show us around the local spots. Although he gave off a friendly first impression, we politely declined his offer. I did notice that although he was dressed up kind of like a stereotypical nerd, he had some pretty hardcore tattoos on his neck. It didn't necessarily make us scared of him, but we just didn't care for his service. We kept walking and eventually ended up in a busy part of town with a lot of people, so we really were not concerned about him at all. He kept on following us around, trying to chit-chat about the best bars and clubs. I guess it just seemed like he was a promoter or something. We were just kind of aimlessly walking around, and he began to recommend different spots for us to check out, which we mostly disregarded. Slowly, it seemed like we were walking more into the outskirts of town unknowingly. I don't remember how this exactly happened, but he was able to finally get us interested in a bar. He pointed it out and said it was the best one around, so I guess between the idea of the bar and his overall relentlessness, that's where we ended up going. Oddly, we couldn't even get inside because my roommate didn't have his ID on him. We ultimately walked away from this place, and the follower began to ask if we had any interest in drugs, and he rattled off the names of a few. This was the first time he had mentioned drugs. Like an idiot, I said I was interested. He told us to follow him, where he then led us towards a nearby bar, which was now really on the outskirts of town. On the walk over, my roommate quietly asked me what the hell I was doing buying drugs from this guy, but we continued. I told him it was fine, but I realized now that I was not in good judgment. We walked into this run-down 2-story bar, and he told my roommate to wait by one of the bar stools. He and I walked into the bathroom, where he asked me what I wanted and how much. I said $20 worth, which is all the money I had on me. I gave him the 20, and the bathroom door opened shortly thereafter. Some other random guy came in and gave the tour guide a small bag of drugs, which he then gave to me. I looked at it quickly and it seemed legit, so I put it in my pocket. I was ready to get out of the bathroom, but the guy was kind of in my way, so I made a move to pass him and say thank you. As I did this, he said something like, "Hold on a second, what about the $20 you owe me?" I said I already gave it to him, but he reached into his pocket and pulled out a pathetic crumpled up $1 bill and said, "Nah, you just gave me $1. That's when I knew I was in big trouble. I told him I didn't have any more money, which was true, but he was insistent. As we were standing there, the bathroom door flew open and my roommate walked in and began to use the urinal on the other side from us. I felt relieved seeing that he was nearby. The tour guide then asked me, "Does your friend have money?" I told him I didn't know. The tour guide then suggested that we should go to the ATM. I agreed, not really having another option, and told my roommate to follow us. We were now back on the street in daylight, following him to an ATM. My roommate didn't understand what was going on, but I was whispering to him to give me $20. He was confused, but started suspecting that something weird was going down. We were getting back into a part of town with more people on the streets, which was comforting. I kept asking my roommate to just give me $20 so I can get this guy off our back. He finally handed me a 20, just as we were nearing an ATM. I turned confidently to the tour guide, partly because there were more people around now, and gave him the 20 with a remark like, "There you go, please stop following us." He immediately grabbed the $20 and shoved it into his pocket, instantly demanding more money. We began walking away from him in another direction, but towards a populated shopping area. He stuck right behind us and started making threats, until he grabbed my right wrist where I had a watch that cost about $150. I wrenched my arm away from him, and we kept walking at a brisk pace, now with a lot of people around. I quickly took the watch off and put it in my cargo shorts pocket. We passed by a market, where 2 Hispanic males exited in front of us as we passed them. The tour guide yelled to them, speaking to them briefly. Before we knew it, all 3 men were suddenly running at us. They got a hold of me and pinned me to the wall of the sidewalk, where the tour guide pressed a big ballpoint pen to my neck. One of the guys began looking for the watch, but I stopped him and simply retrieved it to give to him. Once this happened, they fought for it, and my roommate and I ran away. I looked back over my shoulder, and they were literally fighting each other for this watch. We got to our car, tossed the drugs, and drove back across the border safely.